Good morning. I acknowledge that we're gathered here today on the traditional territory of the signatories of Treaty 6, and I also recognize the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection to this land. 6 children receiving child intervention services in Alberta have died since April. 6 children whose safety and well-being is the responsibility of the government. 4 of those children were actually in care. This means that the government was actually the legal guardian of these children. To put that in context, out of the 49 children and young people who died last year under the UCP's watch, 7 were actually in care. Now we're already at 4. This is a crisis, and it's getting worse. Yesterday, the UCP announced a reshuffling of their cabinet. This comes after 3 former UCP ministers, including the Minister of Children's Services, turned away from their responsibility to Albertans so they could work on fulfilling their personal ambitions and run for the leadership of their party, instead of focusing on the work that truly needs attention, and that is to help Albertans through a very challenging time. We're seeing a collapse of our healthcare system as hospitals continue to be understaffed, undersupplied, and pushed beyond capacity. We're seeing inflation reaching a now 40-year high, causing many families to struggle to afford simple necessities like groceries or keep the lights on while their utility bills skyrocket and the UCP can't even get their meager rebate out the door. The former Minister of Children's Services stepped away from her responsibility to Alberta children and families to run as the UCP's next leader. But her department and the children and youth in Alberta were not doing well under her guidance. This is a minister who went to court to stop vulnerable youth transitioning out of government care from receiving benefits they needed to survive. And under her leadership, we saw record deaths of young children and youth, and that number continues to climb. The children and youth who have died under the watch of this government are the most vulnerable and the youngest we've seen. Yet the former minister chose to leave and start campaigning as a new leader. So today, I call on the new Minister of Children's Services to explain what he will be doing to get to work on this crisis immediately. The Minister must commit today to a full actioning of the recommendation from the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate that the Ministries of Health, Education, Children's Services, Justice and Solicitor General, and Community and Social Services appear before a committee to report progress on their work to address the Advocate's many recommendations. The OCYA has been calling for greater transparency and accountability from this government for years, and the former Minister of Children's Services consistently refused these calls, including again in the most recent ministry's response to mandatory reviews on child deaths. I'm also calling on the new minister, Matt Jones, to tell Albertans how he will support the implementation of Bill C-92 so that Indigenous children remain with their families and their communities. There's an overrepresentation of Indigenous children and youth in government care, and the majority of the deaths that we are seeing are Indigenous children and youth. Bill C-92 was first introduced by the federal government in 2020 and allows First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities to have jurisdiction over child and family services. However, the UCP has stalled recognition of these arrangements that were made possible by this federal legislation. First Nations communities in Alberta are demanding answers, and the implementation of this agreement was the only recommendation by the OCYA that was fully rejected by the former Minister of Children's Services. The former minister was unable to fulfill her duties and bring ministries together to do this work. Now is the time for the new minister to step up, get to work, and address this crisis. Thank you, and I'll now be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, to use the raise hand function to get in the question queue. If you're on the phone, it's *9. And it'll be 1 question and 1 follow-up. Seeing no questions on site, we'll go to the phone. There's a question on the phone. Go ahead, caller. Please state your name and outlet.
Just wondering, get your broad opinion. You've spoken, Rakhi, about the fact that there's a new minister in the portfolio. What do you make of Matt Jones being assigned to this portfolio, and do you have confidence based on what you know about him that he will answer these calls from the Office of the Advocate?
Well, we don't know much about Matt Jones. I've sat in the legislature with him for 3 years and can't really say much about his experience or his positions or his advocacy on any of these issues. What we do know is obviously he'll be a very inexperienced minister, as this is his first portfolio, and he's entering this position at a time when the ministry he's responsible for is dealing with a crisis of children and youth in care dying and being overrepresentation of Indigenous children and youth that has been going on for quite some time. And while I understand a new minister needs some time to get adjusted to a new portfolio, ultimately, there is no grace period here for the UCP or for new ministers. This has been a crisis that we first alerted the government to last year. We saw these numbers rising and we raised those issues, and it took almost a year before the former Children's Services Minister even initiated any kind of review. In the meantime, last year was a devastating record number of children and youth in care who have died. There's been no concrete actions that have been taken to address this. I'm fully aware that some ministers may need some time, but children and youth in Alberta don't have that time. We're already seeing these numbers rising at an alarming rate this year again of children who are actually under the guardianship, legal guardianship of this government. And meanwhile, the UCP and the former minister and this entire government and the premier have been spending well over 6 months just engaged in their own internal drama. This is a crisis, and we need a government that's going to take it seriously. Right now, I don't know if Matt Jones is capable of taking it seriously. I don't know what he's capable of at all. But what I do know is that Alberta families and children deserve to have a government that is focused on this crisis and taking concrete steps. So we'll see, but frankly, I don't really have much patience for their political games that continue to go on when it's resulting in children and youth in care dying, and this government saying we're just not going to address it right now.
Do you have a follow-up, Lisa?
No, thank you.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for calls. Just a reminder, if you're on Zoom, it's the raise hand function. If you're on the phone, it's star 9. Seeing none, that concludes our press conference today.
Thanks so much for watching, and to learn more, check out albertasfuture.ca.